Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the RTS podcast. I'm happy that this next podcast only took us about a month or so since we did the last one because there was a big gap in between that. And this is basically the season 2 now of the RTS podcast, now with new and improved branding, thanks to Melter, who made that cool little tank logo in Photoshop. So Melter's returning. He'll be on most, if not all, of these podcasts. It's season 2. And joining me today as well is a good friend of mine who's been on this podcast a lot, probably the most actually out of everyone. It's Tenchi.
What's up, boys?
So today we're going to be talking about accessibility in RTS games, why they're less accessible compared to other genres, and how we can try and fix that. What are some ideas that we can put forwards? And this is really interesting to me now because I'm an RTS designer working on Ashes, and it's a question that hasn't really been solved. So we're going to do that today, hopefully. And Tenchi's about to wrap up whatever crazy game he jumped into before we started recording.
Yeah, I know. I'm playing like a little FPS thing, but I mean, if you want to, you can just you can restart. But like it's over in 3 minutes, literally 3 minutes.
I just thought people might be like, "Oh my god, Tenchi is so rude. He's like playing a game and stuff." But
sorry.
One talking point that I want to start with, and you guys can then chime in afterwards, however you want to, is I think it's firstly it's important to define like what does that even mean, accessibility, and I think the best definition of that is how easy is it to get into, but I think what's interesting to note is that accessibility, it's often attributed to the learning curve. So people will go, "Oh yeah, RTS aren't very accessible," and everyone knows that, and everyone will say that. And the reason why is because the learning curve is so high. But I think that's a bit of an oversimplification. I think there's actually a lot more to it than that, because I don't think you can argue that StarCraft 2 or Company of Heroes 2 have any more of a steep learning curve than Dota or League of Legends. I don't think any game has a steeper learning curve than Dota. What I think is perhaps more of the root cause for this perception of the poor accessibility is the retention. So say if you try to get your friend to play an RTS game for the first time, really anyone gets to play an RTS, a lot of them are going to lose interest. A lot of them won't get hooked. A lot of them aren't going to develop that interest in it. And I think that comes from the delayed gratification. So if you play Dota or if you play Counter-Strike, there's incremental success that's presented to you in very clear ways. So you run around a corner, bang, bang, wow, you got 2 kills. Awesome, I got 2 kills. And same thing in MOBAs.
Yeah.
There are kills, there are objectives. There's a score even. There's your creep score, whatever it's called in Dota, your like kills, last hits or whatever. And so you can track your progress, and you have those individual exciting moments. And they're presented to you is really the important part, because RTS has a lot of gratification, but the difference is it's self-gratification, and to develop that self-gratification, you need to have a thorough understanding of the game. So
yeah, I think as well, like one thing that's very important as well, that if you compare it to, like I think a MOBA is a really good example, is that inside of an RTS, not only do you need to have a lot of knowledge about the game, all of these moments of gratification are a lot more subtle, I feel, in RTS games. Like you get like a good position on the map or something, and that in itself is a small victory, but it might not be so blatant, right? So if you're not super experienced, then you'll completely miss the point that like this was something good that you did that should give you like an advantage, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so here's an example of what we're referring to. So say you manage to like fly a Reaper in StarCraft 2 into your opponent's base, and you see like a really quick Dark Shrine. That feels good, because you're like, yes, I scouted the Dark Shrine. Awesome, I'm already throwing down turrets. And then you know that your opponent is now, they're in a really bad spot, because they're going to try and use DTs, but you've already brought in turrets, you've already got detection. And so that feels good, because you've outplayed your opponent. But when you're a new player, you don't know that, like, A, you don't know how to scout, so you don't scout to begin with. B, you don't even know what to scout. Like, well, what are you even looking for? You throw a Reaper into your opponent's base, but it's like, okay, well, now what? And see, even if you scouted a Dark Shrine, like, well, what does that mean, and how do I counter that? So that gratification, which is really powerful in RTS, just doesn't happen until you've invested a fair bit of time in learning the game, and you're able to make those connections for yourself. So I think everything you can say about accessibility, why RTS are hard to get into, I think so much of it just comes down to this concept of delayed gratification.
Yeah.
You also think that it's like kind of built into the game itself, because RTS games usually have different phases, right? A building phase where it's not that much gratification as the, I don't know, attack phase or whatever you call the next. Whereas an FPS would just, attack right away, or there's not this much build up. Is that part of it, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you don't really have like I've got about 4,500 hours in CS now, I think, and it's completely different, right? Because when I started playing Counter-Strike, it was frustrating, right? Obviously, because people who've played for longer than I have sort of have all of the base mechanics down to some extent, or like they were at least better than I was. So it's somewhat similar to like when you approach an RTS, like the feeling for me was similar. Is like you start learning Terran. I'm going to use StarCraft as my main example because that's the game I'm familiar with. That's the game I know. It's sort of like when you're stuck. You've got like 3 barracks and you're floating 2,000 minerals because you don't know how to spend your money correctly. It's quicker though. Like that stage of where you're stuck in not knowing how to spend your 2,000 minerals, or like in CS where you're stuck because you keep losing jewels because you don't know how to aim. I feel as if that like time frame is a lot more condensed when it comes down to like FPS, for instance. So you'll get over that hurdle a lot quicker. Whereas in StarCraft, I think StarCraft is like a good example. I can't really think of any other off the top of my head where macro is so important. I guess Age of Empires is another one, but yeah. So those 2 games, you need to like not only overcome the fact of that you need to have the right unit composition, but you also need to be spending your money correctly, right? So there are like a lot of facets to that stage of learning the game, which means that like you start with like 1 or 2 things, like spending my money, making SCVs, but then for each time that you branch out, like, okay, now I've started to spend my money correctly, then that branches out to like another 10 different things, right? And that can be like really intimidating to many new players, because I remember like my good friend Stormless, who you're also very familiar with, Callum, he got into StarCraft a little bit, right? And he played Terran, and he got stuck in this position where he was getting frustrated because he wasn't spending his money correctly, but then he started spending his money a little bit better, but then a whole plethora of additional issues and options sort of opened themselves up. So I think that's like one of the main issues with at least macro-oriented RTS games.
I think you can summarize that by saying it's sort of a never-ending cycle of improving, and furthermore,
for sure.
What's also can be quite off-putting to new people is that you don't know what you're doing wrong. You don't know how to improve it. You don't have that clear aim and that clear goal in mind. Whereas when you're playing Counter-Strike, oh, well, I need to click on my opponent's heads. How do I click on my opponent's head the most efficient way? With RTS, when you lose, you don't know why you lost. Like, well, he had more units than me. Why did he have more units than me?
Or like his composition was better than me. Like why was it better than mine? There are like so many variables in RTS games in that sense.
And you can interpret the game in many different ways. I mean, it's hard in an RTS game to say, oh, I played the perfect game now, because you always make some kind of mistake.
Yeah.
I haven't played StarCraft that much, but if, for example, Company of Heroes or Ashes of the Singularity Escalation, there's never a way to do like a perfect game where you get like a headshot on everybody like you could do in an FPS or something. It's just impossible. So there's always this complexity that's just too much for you.
I think also
sorry, go on.
What is can be really captivating about both shooters and MOBAs is that even if most of your games you lose because you're new, you'll have that one game where you do really well, and that one game is enough to keep you going, because you remember how exciting it was to get that triple kill. You remember how exciting it was to like take out that one guy, then defuse the bomb while your whole team was watching. You have that individual success, where with RTS, even if you win that one game, again, you don't really understand why you won. You just won. So it's harder to have a one game that keeps you motivated. And even then, it's with RTS, there's no such thing as luck, unless you're playing Company of Heroes 2, then there's lots. But like in terms of in a shooter game, you can be like the biggest noob, but if you're camping somewhere and some guy just runs out ahead of you, you just shoot him in the back. Like, you've killed someone. It took you no skill to do so, but you killed someone. You did well. Well done. Congratulations. And that feels good. And same with a MOBA is like, you can just get fed because, you know, your other teammate sucks, and then your other team members, your opponents suck, or your own team carries you, and then you just get really fed, and then you do really well and get lots of kills.
I just want to point out that I think that's like a really important distinction to make early on, though, because most RTS games competitively in a competitive setting, they're played like 1v1, right? Whereas MOBAs, CS, Call of Duty, Halo, whatever, they're played as a team. And I think that the point you brought up there, that, you know, like you're defusing the bomb, you clutch and defuse the bomb, your whole team is watching, like that's really important to keep people coming back, you know, to the product or to the game. That's kind of what kept me coming back to CS, you know, like because I have mates to play with. Like that's such a huge part of it. That's why like RTS games comparatively are, you know, really, really small, because it doesn't appeal to people to be in that position where like all of the responsibility rests on them. People don't want to be in that position, pretty much, you know, because it's like uncomfortable. And then obviously if you want to improve, you need to be really self-critical. Like you need to analyze yourself a lot, which can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people I experience. Like I used to do a lot of StarCraft coaching a couple of years ago, and then, you know, when I talk to like students about, like, they send me a couple of replays and then we break things down, many of them would be like really defensive. And they'd be like making excuses, you know.
I've seen that in so many people's YouTube videos. Like, say you'll get someone like Pig who's coaching, and then like some people get really defensive. It's really frustrating to watch when there's like a noob who's clearly making mistakes, and then the coach is like, "Hey, you probably shouldn't do this," and they get really defensive about it. It's like, no, stop.
Yeah, because like many people would be making excuses like, yeah, well, I mean, I was looking at this other place on the map, or yeah, well, I was microing in this fight. Like that's actually something that I get, because I still play Company of Heroes like quite regularly with a couple of friends. And when I tell them like, yeah, you need to watch this, the excuse that I guess like, yeah, well, I was focused on this micro, like, well, that literally means nothing, right? Because like you should be in a position where, or like optimally, you should be in a position where you can comfortably micro all of the things going on simultaneously, or at least, you know, have the priorities set correctly, because that's kind of how it works, right? You have a set list of priorities, like from 1 down to the bottom. At the very top, keep my army alive. 2, keep tech correctly. 3, accurate scout, or like active scouting. 4, whatever. Do you know what I mean? And then you need to like prioritize. So same things. If you're microing 3 armies simultaneously, you do the same thing. You prioritize. This is the most crucial army to micro at this point. Then number 2, then number 3.
Well, and you time things. You don't drop until you've done your macro cycle. But not to go on a tangent about StarCraft, because otherwise Tenchi will spend the next hours just doing that. But that's a really good point about the social element of RTS games. It's something that I really do want to get into. But
I think that's the biggest point, to be honest. Like.
Yeah, and we can expand upon that. There was just one other thing that I wanted to wrap up, is that like I think what I was saying about how with FPS and MOBAs, how you get the individual games that are like really, really fun, even if most of them suck. That one game is enough to keep coming back. I think the best example of this is PubG. Like games in PubG vary so much, and that's both why it's successful, not only like playing it, but also for streaming. Like there really is some substance to why PubG is such a popular streaming game. It's because whenever you're playing PubG, and I haven't played it that much, to be fair, but whenever you're playing PubG, you're always in the back of your head, you're always like, oh man, I hope this is the game. I hope this is the one where I go on this ridiculous journey, where I go around here, get all these weapons, kill all these people, go... And so you have that kind of optimism that like The game is sort of outside of your control. Like that's how I feel sometimes when I play MOBAs and shooters. Is that obviously it is, it's me playing, but I feel like whether or not I have this fun, exciting game where I do really well isn't up to me. It's sort of just like luck in a sense, but not in like an actual definition of luck.
Yeah, but aren't we sort of attracted to that, like the uncertainty? Like that's why people gamble, because there is this element of excitement as to where like you don't really know the outcome. You can't 100% accurately predict what the outcome is going to be. And I think PUBG is like the same way, because like you'll drop down, you don't know how many people are going to be dropping with you, you don't know what kind of loot you're going to be finding, and then you don't know where the next like loot crate is going to be dropping. So PUBG has all of these like design ideas that they've implemented to sort of create this excitement, to create waves essentially, which it's been doing really well, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's exactly what I was saying, is that RTS doesn't have that, whereas all these other multiplayer games do, and the lack of that sort of chance that you'll get this epic game, it's still there, of course, with RTS, but I don't think it's as obvious, and it's not quite.
What do you mean that you have kind of too much control in RTS games? Is that where you're going at?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the way to refer to it. I don't know how I would really describe it, but I feel like RTS games are a lot more predictable.
Or...
Like
that was good.
When
I
you
like that. Sorry.
What, me or Melter?
Yeah, you go on.
When you play an RTS, you kind of know what you're in for. Like you still, it can vary a lot. Like especially in a game like say StarCraft. Like, is this going to be a cheese game? Is this going to be like a long macro game? And I think that's one of the strengths of StarCraft compared to other games, is you do actually have that unpredictability in terms of the way that your opponents can play, where a lot of other RTS are a lot more methodical in terms of game length and so forth. But but even then, yeah, RTS, like you know what to expect. With other genres, you just don't really know what's going to happen.
I agree with that, and it's the reason why I almost exclusively play 2v2 in Company of Heroes with a friend, because it makes it a lot more, I don't know, suspenseful. Maybe because my friend is bad.
Yeah.
Hey.
But yeah, it makes it more complex, and I can't control everything then, whereas if it's 1v1, you said, Tenchi, there's only, I have to blame myself then, right? It's almost too much.
well, it's interesting. I think Company of Heroes to me is like a really niche kind of RTS, right? Because in games like Age of Empires, in games like StarCraft, you have all of the values are absolute. Each hit, each attack animation will do this exact amount of damage. Each upgrade will give you this amount of damage mitigation, damage control. Like you'll know exactly how they scale. Whereas in Company of Heroes, like I don't know if he's suddenly gonna crit my 4-man Gren squad with his double Gren Tommies. Like you have that element, and I think that's one of the things that draws me back into Company of Heroes a little bit, because coming back to the point that we were talking about there, the suspense that you made, I really like that, like as a keyword, right? But simultaneously, because Company of Heroes suffers from like other issues, it does become somewhat predictable though. Like the suspenseful part for me when I'm playing, I don't know how much this is relevant. I'm like a top 100 player in 1v1. I don't really think that holds a lot of water, but the point is like my suspense is my like Stuka gonna be able to wipe this guy's blob of Bren Tommies? Like that's it. Like if I get the wipe, I win the game. If I don't get the wipe, I lose the game. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think you can, with Company of Heroes, the level of unpredictability is ruined. I mean, it has a lot of it because of the way that RNG works, but it's ruined because of the way that the faction design is so rigid. There's very repetitive and deliberately designed like matchup narratives, as it were, where it's like, okay, US early game completely go around bullying Axis because they just have better infantry in the early game, and they have they get free squads and they get like really powerful light vehicles. But then towards the late game, well, then Axis have better tanks, and then the infantry, there's just a lot of like machine guns and stuff around, and so you know what to expect because the matchup works in a very limited, repetitive way.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
Yeah.
I think like an important question then to ask is how if we're saying that part of the accessibility problems of RTS is it doesn't have that it has that delayed gratification, then how can we fix that? But first, let's talk about the social element or the lack of social elements of RTS.
Yeah. Again, like because most competitive settings in RTS are 1v1, a way that people have been trying to work around this, like Blizzard did a really good job, I think, with implementing co-op in StarCraft, which gives you like campaign-esque commanders, and they're somewhat similar to, is it like in Command and Conquer Generals? Yeah. Because like
a sub-faction.
you can, yeah, exactly. But you can call in things, right? Like to each commander, because they have like unique abilities and unique units, right? If I'm not mistaken. Am I mixing this one up?
I've only played it a little bit. So the way that it works in co-op for StarCraft 2 is that you have like a bunch of different sub-factions, as it were, but they're
like heroes. They're like heroes or something.
Yeah, it's a hero, but it's a sub-faction effectively. Like,
for sure.
I mean, it's not even really a sub-faction though, because they have like different buildings and stuff. But either way, I mean, you sort of recognize them as Terran, Zerg, and Protoss, so they're like sub-factions. But more importantly, the point is you have, for a start, you have a limited roster. So rather than having 20 units, you have maybe like 10 units. But also the way that macro works, rather than spending 50 minerals to build one Marine, you spend 1,000 minerals to call in like 30 Marines. So it makes the macro a lot easier. And so what it does is not only does it give you you
get the unique units as well, like from you get like not only campaign units, but you also get like individually unique units tied to only that commander, and then you have like campaign objectives that you play with a friend. So look, I think that's like a really good way to do it. Company of Heroes had a really good thing as well with the co-op. I actually really enjoyed the co-op for the most part. It's like Case Blue,
the Theater of War.
Yeah, that's what it was called, Theater of War. I think Company of Heroes did a really good job with that. Like that's something that I've been wanting for like a really long time. And like if we saw more of that in RTS, where they took like elements of the single player or elements of the multiplayer, tied that into like a co-op experience with solid objectives and like good, like well-made, well-designed narratives for that, then I think that would be like a really good access point for people to come in, right? Because like I've been dragging a bunch of people into Company of Heroes by doing the Theater of War, like showing it to them, because I'm like, yeah, guys, this is cool,
But I think that the way I think about the social aspect for an RTS game is, for example, if I should tell my 12-year-old cousin, oh, you should play Company of Heroes, right? What will be the biggest hurdle for him, for a young person to get into? I think it will be the time for there's so much investment in, he should, like every game is 45 minutes, 1 hour, maybe even more, right? So it's hard to just get into, and you make a lot of mistakes in the beginning, so you have to invest a lot of time where you just make mistakes.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, you need a person standing by you and helping you along if you want. So you can't just go into an RTS and play with like 64 other people and get shot and then shoot other people. It's very hard to get on the same level as everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing though, like because the formula for RTS games is a lot more complex, at least initially. That's like the main hurdle to overcome. But I think that if you get into an RTS comfortably, like it's a lot more gratifying.
It is, yeah, it definitely is. It makes a lot more sense, and the gratification is, I think, is bigger in the end. But
I agree.
But the thing is that the question that I'm asking is it kind of built into the DNA of RTS that it should be harder, right? And if you take that away, do you actually take away the whole element of what makes it fun to play RTS? I mean, can you even make it accessible as a social game?
Well,
without removing the game itself.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, first thing, I think with children, they probably have less tolerance for delayed gratification.
Yeah, of course.
The younger someone is, they're going to want that gratification faster. So I think it's,
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we all grew up playing RTS as kids, but that's sort of different because, I mean, for a start, it was like mainly single player, but that just, RTS were just so popular back then. So like if you were just a gamer at all, like you would just play RTS because that was so
That's
prolific.
true, because I think that's actually a really important point, Callum. Because it's like a generational thing, right? Like my dad, when he got the first PC that I can remember, you know, like home PC with like Windows 95 or something. One of the first games that we played was like Warcraft 2, Age of Empires 1, and then there's like another one called like Cave Wars or something, and then the early Command and Conquer games. And at that point, like the big thing that you'd play on your PC at home, or like, you know, whatever, were like strategy games and then like simulators. Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't really have the same amount of variety. Like MOBA was not
No.
a genre. Competitive FPS was not really a genre. You know.
Yeah, for me, when I was young, the only computer there was for me to play on was at my grandmother's house, right? And it would be a really long trip there. So when I was there, I mean, I might as well play some complex game, right?
Yeah.
It took some time to get there, anyways. It's not easy for me to play when I was young. So I played Sudden Strike and other very complicated RTS games.
Well, there's a lot to unpack about what Tenchi said about the StarCraft 2 co-op, and I do have some thoughts on that. But first, I want to ask the question to you guys. Why do you think RTS is predominantly 1v1? Though actually, that's perhaps a bit misleading, because if you look in terms of player count, like if you look at Company of Heroes 2, or probably even StarCraft, I don't know the numbers, but there are more people playing 4v4s than 1v1.
In StarCraft, I think.
Well, certainly in most RTS, maybe not StarCraft specifically, but most of them.
Yes, StarCraft is mostly 1v1 and co-op, as I understand it. This is an old statistic from 2017, like November or October of 2017. But Blizzard, like I got these numbers from a friend of mine who went to the StarCraft Summit. They have that annually in the like at Blizzard HQ in Anaheim. And they had 1.2 million unique logins on average, like every month. But that didn't divide it up into like 1v1 and like a co-op and stuff. Those were just like the number of unique logins. But I think that we've got about like 300,000 active 1v1 players overall, like globally. And then the rest of that is divided up between like team games, arcade. Arcade is a big thing, by the way. That's important to note for StarCraft, because like we have a lot of arcade games or a lot of players generationally who came from playing Warcraft 3, customs. We have like a ton of similar custom games in StarCraft 2, so like they moved over to that because, you know, like just better graphics and better optimization. So that's another like part of it. So like I think the majority of the player base for StarCraft overall doesn't touch 1v1.
Okay, so but that's still the question remains, like why do you think 1v1 is so much more popular in RTS compared to other genres? Like, you don't, Counter-Strike 1v1 isn't really a thing. What is it about RTS that's it's more of a 1v1 experience relative to other genres, even if still most of the players play team games?
I don't know.
I think it has to do with the complexity, that it's like if you play 4v4 in, for example, Company of Heroes, the complexity gets so high that, for example, it's very hard to cast a 4v4 because there's just so much going on all the time and everybody's building tanks instantly, right? So it's the complexity makes it, I think, a bit more I don't know, it's just easier to, for example, promote or cast a game with 1v1, and that's why that gets on YouTube and everywhere else. And it's
I guess because, like, to further move on the point that you're bringing up, like the comparison between the two, in 1v1, like we can, like, as people viewing, you know, the game, we actually have the ability to go in there and like understand some of the decisions being made, you know, on an individual level, because like, as you say, in a 4v4 you have 8 players, so like, are we going to dig in the minds of 8 different guys doing, you know, 8 different things simultaneously? Like, you can't really do that. But in 1v1, you know, you have, it's a little bit more intimate, if that makes sense, like for us as observers in the game, because we get to see everything, right? We have no fog of war. We see all the resources, we see all the small decisions being made.
So you're
And,
talking about the spectator experience. So what I was going to say
Yeah.
is that I think the appeal in 1v1 for a lot of people, for at least speaking for myself, the appeal is that everything is in my control. Whereas when
Yeah.
I play an FPS, goes back to the point that I said earlier. There's a lot of luck in the sense of will I shoot my opponent in the back? Will I get sort of lucky sprays? Will I spawn in good spots? If you're playing something
But
like
I mean, I think it's important to be specific in that regard, by the way, like because like CS, everything there is like really rigid, generally. Like again, like you have like really set values, but
yeah, but I still have that perception, even though I know it's not true. I still have that perception that it's
yeah, sure,
it's outside
okay,
of
fair.
my control. Like say again, we'll use PubG as a better example.
Okay.
There's a lot more out of your control, even if it only really feels like it. But with RTS, the appeal of it is that everything is in your control and it's all about you. And then and so 1v1 is the full extension of that. Whereas if you're playing a team game, well then you have a teammate that you have that you're not in control of, that you don't have autonomy of.
And that becomes that X factor that that you try to avoid. Like that's why you play 1v1 games. I think that's like a key point. That is about that you have individual control. Like I think in order to play an RTS game, like in a 1v1 setting, like to a decent level, you need to have like a pretty big ego, because no, I think so because I think it's kind of telling to a certain degree about people's personalities, right? Because like someone who's like really good in a 1v1 game, I mean, they've specifically become really good in that 1v1 game because they don't want to play with other people. Like they have the option to, but they've chosen deliberately to not include other people into that because they want that full control. They want to be able to, not have to worry about that variable of like, is my teammate going to be shit? Is he going to like not be spending his money? Is he going to be making poor decisions? Et cetera, et cetera.
What you're getting at, Callum, is that it's basically the same phenomenon as people that are doing comp stomping, right? Or people playing only versus the computer, the AI. So they also just play it because they are in control of basically the whole thing and can kind of create their own scenario.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's less variables when you're playing versus the AI. It's a bit more predictable.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like with the human elements, you don't really know.
Yeah. Anyway, so going back to that StarCraft 2 co-op, because there's so much there that I think tends to just sort of glossed over. The reason why the co-op works, and I think it's really important to articulate these things. So I think one of the things that you can talk about why the co-op in StarCraft 2 works so well, co-op specifically, like those mission types, is that you actually do have more direct gratification and clear goals and just more direction overall, because you jump into a game and rather than okay, don't lose, go, and you're like, oh, what do I do? It's like, all right, capture this thing, push this thing. And so you know what you're doing, and that's what campaign does as well. Is it directs the player, it tells them what to do, as it were. Another thing that is really important in any team aspect is that you have that combined camaraderie. Is when you win together, you feel good because you've done something alongside someone, and then you feel valued. And humans are very, very tribal. I've read a book about this, and I know I was telling Malta about it last podcast, but we really value the sense of wanting to feel needed and appreciated. And
like a belonging,
Yeah, and this is something that not only MOBAs, but also games like Overwatch really tap into. Because in the way that a MOBA works is you're not just two people in the team. You have a role, you have a class, you're the carry, well, I'm the support, and on their own, the carry is worthless. On their own, the support is worthless. But together, then they're really quite a powerful combination. And you effectively have like a support role in Overwatch, for example. So, and that's part, I think, of why RTS doesn't do team games as well, is that for the most part, you don't have that combined camaraderie, because if I'm playing a 4v4, I'm just one player. I'm nothing really special in particular. And some games, some RTS have ways around this. Like, for example, in Company of Heroes 2, you have commanders. So it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go the elephant. I'm going to go the heavy tank destroyer. So I'll protect you guys against the allied tank destroyers. Tenchi, if you want to go the close air support, you can strafe your opponents with all these different strafes. Melita, you can go for, mass artillery or whatever. Like, you have ways of feeling like you're having a unique contribution that's required as part of the team. But even despite that, for the most part, RTS doesn't offer that combined camaraderie. And some games
I agree.
Some games have tried to reconcile this. Like, I don't know if you guys have played World in Conflict. Have you played that?
Yeah, I've played a bit.
So the way that works is when you play team games is you have certain roles. So you have like it's infantry, tank, support, and aircraft. And you have like a limited roster of what you can build depending on that specialization. So if I'm playing aircraft, I can only build I can build lots of aircraft, but then I can build like only a basic infantry or a basic tank. And then there's a lot more mixing required. That's kind of a weird way of doing it because it really forces you into, like, it limits your access to content. But the idea is there. And Dawn of War 2 had this as well, because you have, like, you revive people in multiplayer, and you have loadouts and war gears and different heroes that give you very specific utility. And I know when that was in beta, there was 1v1 map and there was 3v3. So they went for this team game design, and it sort of worked, but it sort of didn't.
And how does it relate to accessibility?
Well, because it's about the gratification. It's about the retention. Is maybe even a better way of putting it. Is that if you're playing in a team, you have more reason to stick with it, because you have other people egging you on and supporting you, which you don't have in a 1v1. But also, even if you're playing badly, like even if you have no skill, just by being in a specific role makes you feel like you're actually being valued and you're actually contributing and being helpful. So
so I actually have a counter argument to that, Callum.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, so like I play CS with a bunch of guys, right? We have a regular group of 5, but sometimes when we don't have the 5th player, like we'll bring in, like some guy's friend or whatever. And most of the time, okay, never mind. Because that's it. Like the moral of that story is like that I'm just a piece of shit. I'm just like really mean.
Okay.
I wasn't gonna make a point.
Well, Counter-Strike is more team oriented than other FPS games. Like you have classes in terms of like, oh, I'm gonna play the scope, and you have like grenades and
the AW. Hey, actually, you do have support players. Like in a MOBA, you have like similar titles. You have like one guy who's an AWP, he's the sniper of the round. You have the entry fragger on the T side, who's like the guy who goes in first, right? Then you have the support, who generally, like on the pistol round, he won't buy body armor. He'll buy like grenades instead, like a smoke and 2 flashbangs. And that's something that's like generally quite rigid. So you actually do have some similarities between MOBAs and CS. Didn't really think about that until now.
Callum, what's your own thoughts on applying this to when you design Ashes, and when you think about retention in that game? How do you approach it?
So there's a lot that I've done in Ashes to try and make it more welcoming to new players. So like the biggest thing that I've done is I made a whole new tutorial, or even 2 tutorials, the basic and the advanced, because that's really the first impression that everyone has. They jump into the game, and so you want to make sure that you demonstrate how much potential there is, and so that's the way that I see it. Right, is a tutorial. It isn't just teaching someone how to play, if it's done right. It's about giving them a little teaser, like this is all the cool stuff that you can do if you play the game. And so the way that I addressed this specifically is that I broke it up into a basic and advanced tutorial. But I didn't do that in a way that, okay, in the basic tutorial, it's like half of the game, okay, units, structures, like commands and teching. And then the advanced tutorial is upgrades and abilities and stuff like that. Because then if someone plays the basic tutorial and that's all they play, and say that's about 10 minutes, I don't know what the actual length is, maybe 10, 15 minutes, then they're only getting a sample of half the game. So the way that I did it is the basic tutorial. It actually goes through everything in the game. It goes through, units, buildings, capturing points, goes through resources, goes through abilities, goes through upgrades, but it does it in a limited way.
Yeah, but are those like sectioned up? So you have them divided into like movement, command structure, attack, like fighting and stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's a seamless playthrough of a tutorial, and it's an interactive tutorial. Like you play it. It's not just a video. But it doesn't...
No. I mean, what I mean is, like Company of Heroes 1 actually did this really well, where it was divided into like how to move your units, the resource system, fighting, cover and suppression mechanics. Like you did them. I think there were like 7 steps. Is it divided up like that?
Well, no. There's two scenarios. You play a basic tutorial. You play an advanced tutorial. It isn't like broken up into each step. I don't know, I think that kind of ruins the flow if you do that. Like if you have to play mission, start the next one, play, stop, play the next. That's kind of it's like it interrupts the flow. Whereas this,
that's fair.
There's topics like it'll spontaneously change from like now we're talking about this thing, but what I'm getting at is that it demonstrates the entire game. So you go like, wow, this game, you build massive armies, you capture regions, you call down orbital strikes, you upgrade your units, you got to like manage your resources. Like, wow, there's a lot in this game. This game has a lot of depth to offer. There's different types of units and so forth, but then it doesn't overbear players with too much information in terms of like advanced macro techniques, in terms of like the way that cutoffs work, in terms of the way that like there's a certain counter system. Like that's all reserved for the advanced tutorial. Because the thing is with Steam now is like if someone buys your game, it isn't enough, because people will often buy like 10 games at once on sale. They'll buy it because it's on a summer sale, so they'll buy it for like 75% off, and they have 10 other games that they bought. So you really only have like an hour to get them hooked. Because if you don't hook them within that hour, they're just gonna go play something else instead because they bought 10 games, and they bought it so cheap on sale that there isn't really much revenue there anyway. You wanted people to stick with it so they get their friends into it and buy the DLC.
It's interesting that you mentioned this, that you try to demonstrate the whole game, and I see that as kind of trying to create suspense for the players, as we talked about, as a way of introducing or getting more people to the easier accessibility to the game, kind of creating this suspense. Oh, you can do a lot of things, but let's start small, right? So players have this idea that a lot can happen, but it's still easy to get into.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more that I can expand about the tutorial. So like one thing I did as well is that in order to try and give people this gratification, I gave them, there's a few hidden objectives. So you obviously have objectives that it tells you to do, and if you do them, you tick. It's like, yeah, well done. But there's other things that it doesn't actually tell you to do directly. But if you do it, it says like, hey, well done, you did the thing. So say like one of the first things you got to do is you got to build metal extractors. So you build 2, and it says like, hey, well done, you built 2. And then when you capture the next region, it says, I mean, I say, because I'm the voiceover for it, I say like, okay, cool. Now you've captured this region. Now you can build metal extractors to get more income. But I don't actually say like, all right, build more metal extractors. But if the player takes the initiative and they build the metal extractors, a hidden objective pops up as ticked, and then I say like, oh, well done. The more extractors you build, the more income you get. So then the people that discover that are like, oh wow, I did something good. So there's the ways you can give gratification.
That's a really clever way to do it, to like hide them away, because it doesn't. It also doesn't make it feel like a chore, right?
Yeah,
I think that's like a danger with RTS specifically. Like it's really easy for things to feel like a chore for the player coming in. Yeah, that's really clever, Callum. You're so crafty, man.
And for me, it also means that there's a lot less clutter maybe for the player. There's like, oh, I said it to you one time. I don't need to say it to you again, right? You can do it if you want to.
That's
better for the player. It's a better first impression.
Yeah, and as well, like with seeing the like boom, you completed this like hidden task or whatever, that further incentivize, at least to me, like it would further incentivize that I explore the game on my own, and that's what you kind of want to do, right? Like if you get a player to start their journey where they want to explore more of your game on their own, at their own tempo, like the pace doesn't really matter, as long as they're doing that, you've got like a really good baseline, for them to keep coming back to your game, right? Because then they'll be intrigued by what they see and by what they discover.
Yeah.
Instead of being intimidated.
Yeah.
There's other
I
hidden
want to-
objectives too, like if they push out further than they're supposed to and they destroy this thing, it's like, yeah, you destroyed your opponent's forward base. If you deprive your opponent of resources, they won't have as much units. So there's like several ways that I've done that in the mission, and I also like the way the tutorial ends was quite deliberate. So the way that it ends is there's like orbital abilities that you can cast, to like throw down, but there's like ways that you can jam it. There's like buildings that create an aura that you can't use abilities in that area. And so I say that, and then you get a spawn of like 3 heavy bombers. And then I say, okay, blow up your opponent's orbital nullifier, and you'll be able to use orbital abilities. And then it does that, and then I say, all right, well done. Now you can blow up your opponent's base with an orbital strike. And then the tutorial ends by the player clicking the orbital strike and then clicking their opponent's base, and then their opponent's base completely blows up, and then it ends. And specifically, the orbital strike doesn't actually have enough damage to blow up your opponent's nexus, which is like the command center. So I made another nexus in like the mod files that has less health, so that it does get blown up by the orbital strike. And it's a really pretty effect. It's like this, orbital detonation coming down. So when that is combined with the victory, the player doesn't know what to expect. They've never seen this ability before. It ends it on a really exciting note. It's like, bam, that looked really nice.
Yeah. That's important as well, I feel, man, because visual feedback is something that like visual feedback and visual clarity. Like you have pretty good visual feedback and visual clarity in a game like League of Legends, for instance. Personally, I find Dota 2 to be a little bit more messy, but it's pretty much the same thing. And when you have like big abilities like that, an orbital strike in Ashes of Singularity, you have the big call in Company of Heroes, like that's massive, right? That's a huge sort of you get like massive input from the game as a player. You're like, holy shit, and again, like it further creates this incentive to keep exploring the abilities, and then you can start like finding combos of if I drop like this artillery together with like this machine gun suppression, I can make like a really effective infantry killer thing in Code 2. There's
I think that brings me to one of the themes that I wanted to bring up here also, the visual clarity, because I think that's a big hurdle for RTS games, kind of UI, right? It's when you come into a RTS game and there's so many buttons and where should I push and all this, and you have an overview of the battlefield or whatever, it's hard to know what should I look for, what should I press. So I also want to talk about this, how UI works, and because I think that, and it's also Stardock's vision, where me and Callum come from, that games should have more direct feedback and less UI. It should be more immersive. So you could, for example, zoom all the way in and see people living instead of having a representational number. So I want to discuss this. What do you think about UI in RTS games, and can it be less, and should it be less? Is it kind of a hurdle?
So I have some thoughts about this, and this is something that I've talked a lot about in my other videos. I think Company of Heroes 2, really both Company of Heroes games, is full of great examples like this. And so, for example, when you throw a grenade in Company of Heroes 2, or when your opponent throws a grenade, you don't see this like, oh, look out, there's a grenade, like in the way there is in Call of Duty. Instead, all that you see is an individual soldier who stands up, gets his grenade out, and then he lobs his grenade over. And so then what you're doing is you're interacting with the game. You're not interacting with artificial pop-ups over the game. So I think any way that you can take stuff that's being presented to the player via the interface, and instead present it to them naturally using the visuals and the audio of the game. Like another example, even from StarCraft, is like the way that the nukes work from the ghosts. There's this little dot on the ground. There isn't an actual like heads up display like, oh, watch out, there's a nuke. So I think that not only is it reducing clutter, it also is just more fun, because then it's more immersive, because then you're a part of the game. It's not like there's no things flashing at you saying this is a video game. There's pop-ups at your face.
The only thing you guess like is that you hear the audio cue that there's been a nuke launched. Like the narrative will say like, warning, tactical nuke incoming. Or like when you hear a Nidus worm, it's got this shriek, which is really loud that all the players will hear globally, but you don't know where it is. So I think that's a really good way to sort of break down the barriers between. God, how do I put this? I'm not as articulate as Callum. Callum is extremely articulate. So, like I need to. It's really hard for me because like I'm generally not that articulate, which is ironic because I'm a caster. But you know. Let me just backtrack a little bit, because I think like my main point was like if you compare a company, because this comes back to like accessibility and then like, you know, you want to make money off your product, obviously. I think it's important that when you're starting to design your game like from the ground up, do you want this to be like a game that is very, very appealing, like visually? What are you going for here? Are you going for like maximum immersion, or are you going for something that's more focused towards like something competitive? Because like right now, generally speaking, like if you want to make money, either you're EA and you lure a bunch of kids to buy your Battlefront 2 thing, and then have everyone piss on you, and then you stop making money from that game, or you go for an esports focused thing. Like you've seen with Dota 2 or you've seen with CSGO and stuff, like, because that you have a lot of money there, but you just need to be very clear. Like there needs to be very clear lines drawn as you start building your game up. Like, what are we going for here? Like, what is the baseline for this game? What kind of experience do we want to give our players?
Yeah, that's true. I think I don't necessarily agree with the idea of dichotomizing the fact that do I want it to be like immersive,
no, but
or do I want it to be
I think you need to do that to a certain degree. You know?
Okay, well, here's an example that I was going to say anyway. Something that I don't like about Company of Heroes 2, like in on this topic, despite how many great examples it has of not having UI pop-ups. One thing that it actually does is when you select your opponent's HMG, it tells you the arc of their HMG. I don't think you should do that. In Company of Heroes 1, it didn't. And what that means is you actually have to kind of zoom in to the HMG and look, okay, where is it facing? And then you have to sort of estimate where you think the arc would end. And that's a competitive thing, is you're making a decision. Is my flank going to be inside the arc of this MG or is it not? And it's more immersive because there's no pop-ups. But then in Co 2, you see the arc. So you know whether or not you're going to be in the arc.
Yeah. So, same thing, like all the big weapons like that, right? Like 80 guns as well, I guess, are included into that. So it's really easy to just like not go in the arc, I guess.
Yeah, like you should be able to see your own arc, but your opponent shouldn't be able to.
But I think we're a little bit too like this discussion is already too advanced, if we're talking about getting into a game, because if people see I had this reaction many times from people who maybe saw me play or something, saw me play Company of Heroes or another RTS, and their reaction is, why is the camera in the sky? Like these kind of questions. Why is that person moving there? Like, what is this? I mean, these like very, very basic questions that you get from people just seeing the game for the first time. And I think that if you want to make RTS games more accessible, there need to be kind of explanations for these kind of things, right? The very basic. What
really?
Is RTS? I think because, and I will give you an example of something that did it really well. If you played Ruse, right? This remember Ruse? It's a bit of
that's a really old game.
Yeah. So if you zoomed all the way out in Ruse, you'd kind of see the battlefield from up above, but you would also see like kind of a war room, and the battlefield would turn into kind of a war table.
Oh,
where
yeah,
these
that's cool.
pieces were moving around. Yeah, so that was that was an explanation of why you would see things from above, right? It's kind if it was directly in the game. Oh, you are a commander of an army, and you are standing above this table, and then you can zoom in, and it was like this. I really love that. It didn't have any impact on the gameplay, but it was kind of an explanation for beginners on why are you a camera in the sky? You know?
Like it gives them context that makes sense.
Yeah,
That's a really good point.
Yeah, it's kind of an explanation, and
Hmm.
these kind of things needs to be explained. I think if you want more people to get into, like, how come you can zoom all the way in, and what is the meaning of all this, right? Because it's easy for us to see because we play it all the time. So it's like, I'm just in the sky because I need to control my army. Yeah, but for new players, these are the kind of questions that linger.
That's like a really interesting point. I guess that sort of again harkens back to it being like a generational thing, right? Because I assume, I don't know how old you are, dude, but I think like Callum and I are sort of the same age, so like we all grew up in the same generation of
Yeah, me too. I
The
think,
golden
yeah.
era of RTS.
Yeah, exactly. Like we grew up on Age of Empires, Red Alert, and all of those games. Like that was something that came to us like from a very young age, so it's sort of like ingrained into you. But
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it that way, because to me that feels like a little bit overbearing, or I feel
over explanation. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of, but like at the same time, I think it kind of makes sense though.
It's very subtle though,
know.
and it's optional. So it's
Yeah,
not,
yeah, for sure.
One thing that a lot of RTS games do, certainly Command and Conquer, is that when you select them, they'll say like, "What are your orders, General?" or like, "What are your orders, Commander?"
Yeah.
So it does infer that, okay, well, I'm the commander because these guys are asking me for my orders. So yeah, there are the ways you can create that context. There's also ways you can do it narratively. Like Ashes does this, not through gameplay in that sense, but the whole premise of Ashes is that there's the post-humans, which are humans that have merged their consciousness with machines, and they're able to manipulate objects, telepathically, but not really telepathically because they're like
That would be the way that I would explain Ashes if somebody was standing over my shoulder and see me play. It's like, oh, I'm a super consciousness, and they would be like, nerd, but yeah, that's an explanation there, and you can kind of, yeah.
When you play the first
watch the game
mission
through
in Ashes, the campaign mission, it says like, you're a post-human. That's how you're able to see the battlefield on this alien world all the way from Earth. Like it tells you through the narrative. So that's one way of doing it. But I think the gameplay ones are a better way of doing it, because then people may not play the campaign. So then,
but I think there's a potential here, it's exciting if you can tell people that, oh, you are a satellite, right, and you have to watch but I think it's not leveraged right now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This presentation of games to new players.
Another thing as well that does it narratively is in Supreme Commander and even Total Annihilation is you play as the commander. So the commander that you control around, and he builds stuff, and if the commander dies, you lose, and everyone else is just robots. Like all the tanks that you build, they're not humans; they're just robots. Where the commander is the only person. You might be an alien, and so what that does is it means the commander, because it's also what you start with. You only start with the commander and nothing else. So the commander is your anchor into the game. It's your avatar, which you need to protect, because it's you. If the commander dies, you lose. So that's an interesting way of doing it, and you could do that, I think, narratively as well. For like let's say Zerg. So let's say like you are the hive mind, and like rather than being a hatchery, and you lose if your hive mind is blown up. So I think you could do that, but it does limit your game design a little bit.
But it's an interesting concept. Is you say anchor, right? It's a good design concept that you need to anchor people in something, right, when they start, and these should be pretty low-level things for new players.
Like I think a way that you could do that is if you're playing a campaign, say it's Company of Heroes. Actually, no, Company of Heroes does this in the first campaign. Is it has in the cutscenes, the in-engine cutscenes, it has like these characters, and I think
that's true.
I think you're one of them. And then the sort of the weird thing though is that these characters aren't actually in the combat that you play as. But
Sorry, didn't they bring that back for the Ardennes Assault thing as well? Like something
Oh,
similar?
I know you have certain like heroes. I didn't play it, but yeah, Guardians Assault has you know, like Captain Jackson who dies, and then there's other people.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's trying to make it appear as if you are one of these people. Where in the Co-1 cutscenes, it was sort of presenting it as if you were one of those. Like, you know, the way
Yeah.
that like
To just make it more immersive for
yeah,
people
like
like
Band
coming
of
into it.
Brothers and uh what's the other one? The Pacific kind of do that.
The
Like
Pacific.
it swaps, but the Pacific's probably actually a better example. Though the Pacific does swap through two perspectives. It has Eugene Sledge in the second half, and then the first half is this other guy, Lecky, I think. And so it's sort of like it's your protagonist into the events that are taking place.
Yeah.
And what I was going to say back about the Company of Heroes campaigns is, say like you are a captain, and you follow this captain in the cutscenes, and then when the mission starts, like you see the captain that you are supposedly playing as just outside of the map with like a map out and a radio, and then everything else happens that you control all the people, and your character doesn't interact with the game, but like you see that he's there, and you see that like, oh, this is me, he's got a radio and a map, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm the commander, I get it.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I mean, I guess that would be like a way to maybe incentivize for people to, to up accessibility. But at the same time, I don't know, like, how much it would actually do in reality. I think, I guess that you would have to like have a sample of, a bunch of games that use that sort of idea, and then look over, the number of people who stay, like, who keep playing a game like maybe 3 months later, and see if, and then you have them play games that don't have that sort of a narrative function, and then compare, like, are they still playing this other game that lacks that
Science
sort
it.
of yeah, sort
Yeah,
of.
I think when it comes to this topic of why are RTS less accessible, and why do they have less retention, and so forth, I think it's death by a thousand cuts. So I don't think there's like one thing that we're going to think of and it's like, oh, we fixed the problem. It's a lot of these little things that RTS games can try and do, and I think they will make differences if there enough of them are done in creative ways. But I think like probably the biggest things is like obviously find more ways to do more direct gratification earlier on.
Yeah.
And another important thing is, but like the other thing that I didn't even finish talking about the StarCraft co-op is find game modes that are less difficult, like less challenging, less management, and the campaign traditionally has been that. But the problem with that is then it's not multiplayer. So something like the arcade's a great example. Theater of War is a great example. Like a co-op campaign, like at Red Alert 3 had a co-op campaign. The way that worked is if you played it single player, your co-op commander was just an AI. So like it was entirely co-op. It was just depends on if you played with an AI or with a human. Because then you're getting people in, and then from there they can branch out to the other game modes. And a lot of other genres have this. So say you play League of Legends, you have ARAM, all random or middle. I mean, Counter-Strike, I guess you have other game modes, but it doesn't
Yeah,
quite
you have
need
like
it.
bots and DM,
Yeah,
like
yeah, but
deathmatch.
in gun game, but I don't know how many people actually play those. But
Yeah, a fair amount. I mean, you always get a full service. So.
yeah, but
But that's because CS has, like many, like 600,000 players a day on average or something. So it's just like a numbers thing at that point.
yeah, but I think
Yeah, but it has a lot to do with selling the game. This and you said that I don't remember what you said specifically, Callum, but I know that, for example, our CEO Brett Wardell, he talks a lot about the reason why people why it's hard for new RTS games to kind of get into the market is that they're competing with every RTS game out there, and not just the ones from this year, but also the ones from 10 years ago.
right,
And
yeah,
that's not the same with our FPS games or other genres, because they are able to show that something, like when you watch a trailer for a new RPS game, you immediately see what is new, right? because there's better
Yeah.
graphics or whatever, new guns or something. But it's very hard to spot with the new RTS game what is the selling point, what is new. So you have to be able to show people these anchors that we talked about. What is the new thing here? And RTS games have to be, I think, better at that. This immediate gratification that you said, even before you buy the game, right? You see, oh, this is why I should buy it. And not just because I played some other RTS game.
And again, like to further your point, I think that it's really difficult as well because not only do you have to compete with the genre, like within the genre of RTS, you have to compete with all the other games that are out there, like the
mod games too.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you have any previous IPs or something like that, because like the market now is like 50 times larger than it was 10 years ago. You know. So it's I mean, it's definitely tough, but I think that, I mean, we do have a couple of RTSs coming out, right? Like we have this one called Iron Harvest that I've seen a lot of excitement
I've backed
about.
it. Yeah, it looks sick.
Yeah, right. So Iron Harvest, I remember, God, what was it that like Paradox Interactive released a game called Normandy 44, I think is the
Steel Division.
Steel Division, that's the one.
A while ago, didn't know, like over a year.
That was like a year or something ago. But the point is that let me just gather my thoughts here briefly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, right, there we are. Right. So I mean, we do have like a decent amount of RTSs coming out, but I think that the difficulty in getting people to play these games is going to be like they're going to be looking at them and they're not going to be they're not going to be comparing them to like the other new games coming out. They're going to be comparing to the games they're already familiar and comfortable with. Yeah. So like you'll see elements of games like, yeah, you know, this kind of looks like this mechanic in StarCraft, or it kind of looks like this mechanic in Company of Heroes, but then this other thing that on the side of that isn't as refined as, let's say, in StarCraft or Company of Heroes. So why should I play this game when I can just go and get the same experience in Company of Heroes in a setting that I'm familiar with and, you know, something that I'm a lot more attached to.
That's a good point. I think you could summarize that by saying transferability. Is that when you play an RPG, the skills transfer, the mechanics transfer, and same with RPG games. The skills transfer very directly. I mean, MOBAs, they do as well, but MOBAs are hard to transfer because you have to learn all the new heroes and all the new abilities and so forth. But with RTS, there's a lot less transferability. Like, you can be the world's best StarCraft player, but if you go play Company of Heroes, it's like, well, now I have to learn suppression, I have to learn about reinforcing. There's all these different systems and mechanics. And so the example that you mentioned was Steel Division. Now, that's an interesting example because that's by Eugen, and their RTS games are all pretty much the same, going from European Escalation to Airland Battle to Fire Dragon to then what's that latest one called? Steel. I just said it. What are they called?
Steel Division.
Steel Division.
Steel Division.
Is that those games are basically all the same, and so what that means is that it's transferability. Is that everyone who's played the old Eugen games. That's the name of the developer. They can then play the new ones, and so
it's kind of like the Man of War thing as well, right? Same thing going on there, like same engine, same
like Total War.
So I think that this idea of the universal RTS, I think that's one direction to go. Everybody knows the system, and the new game will play just as the old one.
I think it's a lot harder to make a whole new RTS IP than it is to just make a sequel, because again the transferability is the thing. When you make a new game, a new RTS game, everyone's going to be like, oh, I have to learn this thing. Where if it's like, oh, by the way, we're making Warcraft 4, everyone's like, well, I know Warcraft 3, like I can play that, that's fine. And so that's an interesting point that I didn't really think about, is that
but didn't we kind of get like a pretty wide jump between Age of Empires 1 and 2, and then Age of Empires 2 to 3?
Well,
like wasn't that like a really big jump?
A really big difference, essentially, and that's because the genre was still evolving. It was, the technology was evolving, back from the 90s, 2000s. Now the genre has cemented. There's obviously innovations, and the visuals are kind of stagnated, but the genre was still being worked out. Where
I think that's fair.
Because if you compare any RTS like in that era, like you compare Command and Conquer 1 to 2 in generals, like each new game is like so different, but it's because it was just the time.
Yeah, the genre has cemented, but I have let me say this theory, and you tell me if you if you like this theory. So I had this idea that maybe the RTS game has actually evolved more than we think. We just didn't realize it. And what I'm thinking of is a game like Mountain Blade, right? That games that implement this kind of first person or third person view on the battlefield, but also have this strategic view up in the sky, right? Maybe these are the next generation of kind of RTS games. These kind of blends of genres,
Well,
What do
they've
you
been
think
around
about
for a
that
while
idea?
though. There's plenty of them, like Battlezone 1, Battlezone 2. Those are really cool games. There's
Do you guys
several
remember
others.
Natural Selection?
Yeah, yeah. So it's not a new concept, and it hasn't really taken off. So it's not like it's this untapped thing that's gonna rise in popularity all of a sudden. It's been done, and it'd be interesting to try to work out why that is. But they didn't really go off. And so I think that there's a bit of a contradiction between what I was saying, and that's sort of the problem here is that, like, how do you market and offer something new to RTS players, but then at the same time, how do you also say, no, don't worry, you're not going to have to learn a whole new game. You're going to be able
Yeah.
to transfer your knowledge and your skills from the other game to then this one. And
That's what Iron Harvest did really well because they just changed the setting.
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Of
yeah.
this
It's like the
new
gameplay
world.
doesn't look any different to Company of Heroes, but it's just this
Yeah.
funky world, this new like IP.
Can I just I think isn't that a bit of an issue though, like when it comes to transferability, because then that too can be as a bit of a hill for new players to overcome. Like one of the main arguments that I keep getting to people like not wanting to get into StarCraft, they're like, yeah, I think it looks cool and stuff, but it's that you other guys have been playing it like 8 years now. Like, how am I going to compete? You know? So like it can be a bit of a double-edged sword in my opinion. Like, because if you have something that is completely fresh and completely new, obviously if you're like a veteran to some of the high level RTS games, like you've played at a high level, then you'll probably be able to get in quicker into the game. But everyone will sort of have, a level playing field, at least initially.
But I think the answer there is that you have to make it look new so that you attract new players, but it feels old, right?
Like by the way it plays.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's
Yeah,
also the problem that RTS aren't on consoles, so people aren't getting exposed to RTS in the way.
Consoles, RTS.
Yeah,
Halo
it's
Wars,
been
boys.
done. Subcom 2 was on console as well, but anyway, so people always have. Whenever you try and get someone to play an FPS, they've always already played an FPS, unless they're just completely new to gaming entirely. Whether it's they've grown up playing console games, whether it's they've been growing up playing PC, everyone's always played an FPS before, and
Have a reference point. Yeah.
yeah, maybe
Yeah,
like
exactly.
RTS aren't actually less accessible than FPS. It's just that everyone already has played FPS before.
Yeah.
But we don't really have any solutions, and obviously I didn't expect for us to have many. Do you have any ideas of how you think we could make it more gratifying? Like if there was some kind of like pop-up, like you do something in an RTS and it's just like, wow, nice exchange, and then like it shows you the value of like minerals that you lost relative to game, like in this battle.
Yeah,
like,
sure,
some kind of
sure.
like way of giving external gratification in a way that you get in an FPS because it shows your score of like you killed him.
They tried that. Like you'd get pop-ups of XP whenever you killed units in StarCraft.
Oh, Co has that. Yeah.
Yeah, like StarCraft has that as well. Like you'll get XP, but it wasn't like a very well fleshed out system, so it sort of just like fell kind of flat on its face. But
Well, I don't
maybe
think
that's
that
like
that really helps though, because it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. But what I mean is like, double kill, headshot, like that sort of stuff.
I think it's really hard to implement well in a way in an RTS so it doesn't become obtrusive. Because like for me personally, if I was playing an RTS game and then I had the narrator or like big pop up indicating like, yeah, you fucking wiped a squad in Co, I'd be like, oh god, like it's really annoying.
Well, obviously you turn it off, but do you have any ideas about that, Melter?
I just think that thinking about simple features within the games are not going to change that much because it's still within the same genre, right? And it has the same image.
Yeah.
So at one point, the genre will change and we'll see something new. And maybe it will be kind of more immersive strategy games, immersive real-time strategy games where you can zoom in more or go out further. I don't know. But the genre needs to change itself, I think, for it to be more appealing.
Right. See, the reason why I really want to figure out this question is because it's like, well, what if we start making an Ashes 2? What if we start making whatever other RTS? Like, I want to have the solution to these in mind.
Yeah.
I think one interesting solution is that the Ashes actually had done in the campaign is that, like, when the first mission starts, it starts off with like a big battle. It's like it zooms in. Look, there's like all these units shooting each other, and so it shows you the scale. It shows you like this is what you can get to in the late game, and then it just goes to your one unit.
Yeah.
So trying to give, because then what you're doing actually in that sense is you're giving a player a goal to aim for, which they normally don't have. But in this case, their goal is to build a big army. Like that's what I want to do. I want to build a big army. I want to use those things for myself. Trying to show them what's available, and then you're directing them in a sense.
Yeah, but that's also like a really subtle way to do it. You kind of looking back. I mean, because in this discussion, I've been getting a lot of I've been thinking a lot, and a lot of it has been me going back to like my early days, getting into like Warcraft 3 and stuff, because that one was like really, really big to me, right, in terms of how it appealed to me, right? And I think that maybe if you can tap into that sort of in that same create the same feeling that I had, because I remember like you start the human campaign, right, and you only have like footmen, like the basic unit for the human race, and then you fight an abomination, which is like this huge undead late game unit, right? And then later on you'll get to play with that unit yourself, which incentivizes for you to sort of keep delving further into the game itself. But then also that is like massive gratification, like holy shit, I've been fighting these big guys like all campaign long, and now I finally get to control them myself, and then now I can bring them into multiplayer.
Right.
Maybe that's a thing, like sort of tying them really hard into the narrative, like the whole plethora of all the units.
Warcraft 3 is good in that regard because, I mean, for a few reasons why. So firstly, just because you have a hero, like, and again, that's your anchor into the game, and then you level up your hero and stuff, and you obviously have all these appeals of an RPG. But also, Warcraft 3 is a very small scale RTS, and the smaller the scale of the RTS, the easier it's going to be for players to feel connected and understand what's happening, and to again, to have an anchor into the world. Whereas then when you take something like Ashes, like a big scale RTS, like that makes it way harder. And
that's interesting.
So the scale of the RTS would, and like the zoom level as well as just the fact that you have a lot more units. So I think this is a challenge that doesn't face all RTS games equally.
No, I agree. I think that's a fair statement to make. So it's really tough though, like, because again, I think it's like a really faceted question. I don't know really. Like I think that even if we sat down and talked about this for like hours, I personally don't think that we could come to like a concrete conclusion as to how like optimally make RTS games more accessible, because I think at the end of the day, it's about what kind of crowd you want to attract.
Yeah,
because you can't please everyone. Like we've seen this, right? Like when a game designer tries to appeal to the hardcore players and the casuals and everything, and they get tied all in together, like it becomes a shit show, and then no one ends up buying the game.
Yeah. I think the most successful RTS games are going to be ones that are either direct sequels or they're very obviously spiritual successors. And we mentioned Iron Harvest, but say like a Warcraft 4 would be really popular. Age of Empires 4 could be really popular.
I don't know, man. It's being made by Relic, so
yeah. Well,
like
we'll
that
see.
already puts me off the game, to be honest. Like just knowing that Relic are the ones behind it, like that just puts me off, to be honest.
They certainly haven't left a lot of optimism after Dawn of War 3, but But I think the transferability is something that's important. And say like another spiritual successor to Command and Conquer, and it's actually sort of it's a shame because there's been a lot of those, but most of them just haven't been very good. Like Grey Goo, Active Aggression, 8-Bit Armies, like those games, they had a lot of attention. People were really keen because like, oh yeah, Command and Conquer, awesome, but then the games just weren't very good. So I think that's the starting point. Is you have to go, this is the RTS that we are looking to deliver a successor to, and then that's gonna then that transferability problem is solved. Because then people know what to expect. They don't have to relearn mechanics because they already have the Age of Empires or the Command and Conquer experience. Like what's that Age of Empires clone called? Empires Apart. Like that looks really cool, and that's basically just an Age of Empires clone, but it's like
never heard of it. Empires Apart.
Yeah, it looks quite nice. So like even if AoE 4 it doesn't end up that well, like that could be an option.
It's very cartoony. I guess that's like an attempt to be like, hey, look at our unique art style.
Well, a lot of indies do that because it's cheaper to do cartoony than it is to
do... okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Anyway, do you have any more thoughts, Milta or Tenchi? Because I think we can begin to wrap it up.
Oh, yeah, good discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry for being so like not cohesive.
No, what I think happened is you brought up some things that I didn't really think about, but then I was able to analyze pretty well. So
yeah, like I think that's like one of the things, right? Like I'll drag out a simple point that you could explain in 30 seconds, and I'll make that a 2-minute.
Yeah,
ramble.
but I wouldn't have thought of it otherwise. But I think this is certainly a subject that I think we could talk about again, maybe with like a bunch of other people, and see if they have anything else to offer.
Definitely, yeah.
Because it is, as I said, this is a serious problem that I want to solve as a designer for an RTS studio. But anyway, thanks for joining me, guys. It's been a blast.
Pleasure.
And thanks for tuning in, everyone who has watched us. Our Twitter handles are on the screen there, so you can follow us, and I'll leave a link on the YouTube videos. I rant a lot about RTS, so if that's your jam, then follow me there. Tenchi does a lot of casting for StarCraft, CSGO, mobile games apparently now as well.
Anything that gives me money, man. Fucking love money.
Do you like money as well, Malta?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know. What do you actually tweet about?
I don't tweet these days. I mostly make stuff for Stardock.
Wow.
So, yeah, maybe in the future.
Cool. All right. We'll catch you later, guys. We'll see you next time.